the very first public station to ever show In the Life was a very small station called KOCE in Los Angeles on June 9th, 1992. So 25 years, a few days ago. They weren't really, we had hoped that it would not be premiered ahead of the New York station WNYC, but they snuck it in because Los Angeles Gay Pride was at that time. And in an interview for the Los Angeles Times, John, you said to the LA Times, quote, "Our show will be fascinating, interesting, and provocative, but not controversial, unless you happen to think gay and lesbian subject matter is controversial in itself. And if that's the case, there's nothing we can do about it." So that is vintage John. But how did you get the idea for this series? I think the idea goes back a number of years before it actually aired in 1992.
Well, yeah, I had been working in and out of with PBS with before Stonewall. The whole concept was that when we first started with before Stonewall, it was like a one-off, and it seemed to me that what they would say to their audience, "Oh, we're just doing this once," and it didn't seem like there was a commitment to follow through, right, on these kinds of issues. And I thought, well, what would happen if we did a series? Then they would have to say, and it became a political thing, they would have to say, well, I guess it's on next month again, and it's on the month after. And yes, we are committed to doing a program. And I thought, wouldn't that be cool? And so the idea was just, I got a few people together, but we were in the kitchen over here right down the road on Gansevoort Street in my kitchen, and that was our first office. And we figured we'd take a year to sort of raise the money enough to try to do a show. And it really was like the kids get together and put on a show in the barn, that sort of concept. And so I convinced anyone who I could find to come and help. And of course, Charles was very important in that. And so we just kind of launched it. And luckily, as you saw, they started attacking us right away. And with that came a lot of people all over the country started hearing about this series because we were attacked nationally. And that became our membership. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people became members of In the Life. And how we got on all those stations, because we would build our own networks, was basically people would call up, give money, and then call up and say, why can't I get In the Life here on the TV show, on my TV? And that's how we built the network to something like close to 300 stations in a very short period of time. So that was sort of the beginning of it, but it actually started in the kitchen right down the street here at Gansevoort.
And how did you come up with the name In the Life? Why not Here Come the Homos or something?
Well, I had put a series together for 1980 called Different Drummers. And the Corporation for Public Broadcasting was about ready to put like $2 million into it. And it was going to be this huge, big series on gay life on PBS. And Ronald Reagan got elected that year to president, and and they all got like cold feet. And so they said no. And so I just put this thing away. And then the gay revolution happened. There was a revolution in America after the AIDS crisis, and the 90s came. I felt that there were enough people who could financially support our project, individuals. People all over the country would start giving us money, and I figured that might be enough. And so I dusted off the old Different Drummers, went into, there was a station here called WNYC, Yeah, it was the other station. Channel 13 was too scared. I went to them and they kind of like, no. And so I went over there, and the guy was nice, and he had just did that Paris is Burning thing, and he was into it. And he said, sure, I don't have any money. I said, well, I'll go out and raise the money myself, but would you at least put us up? And that was the beginning. He said, yeah. And then he said, but that title, Different Drummers, is really not not very good. I said, I know. And I was just thinking, and then I remembered this great line from a woman in Sage here at the Sage thing. I've forgotten her name. I'm getting a little older, but an African American woman who in before Stonewall, we asked her, well, were you gay, or the women of Harlem? And she said, oh, honey, we were all in the life. And then I started researching. Well, in the life was the term that was used in the Harlem Renaissance to sort of capture all the folks who were sort of in the life, who were gay. And so I thought that was, and he thought it was a much better title, and that's where it began. It was from a little line. Mabel Hampton. Does anybody remember Mabel Hampton? Yes. And so she said, in the life, and so that's where it started. Sorry about that. Mabel was such a wonderful person.
So from the time you really started to organize till broadcast was only about a year. That's actually quite quick, considering.
It was a year, a good solid year, wouldn't you say, Charles? Mackie Alston and a few of us were over it. Did you come?
That's my question next. How did you come to it, Charles and Bob?
Were you working
in your kitchen? I remember
kitchen?
your kitchen. Yeah, I remember stuffing envelopes in your kitchen, John. It was about a year stuffing envelopes and trying to get people interested. And yeah, it was a very exciting time. I think I just remember the energy of the volunteers that you got. It's incredible.
Bob, how did you come to the pilot?
I'm going to say that John asked me.
Yes, I did.
And what I've never found out is how he and why he asked me. But I do remember that when he asked me, no hesitation at all, I said I would love to do this. I had only come out recently and once I came out, I said I will never go back in, and this to me was a great chance to let other people know that we have us out there in all these towns and everything else. And John laid it out for me, and then he explained what he wanted to do with the show, and I thought that would really be wonderful. I didn't realize that in the pilot show we were going to have 7 shows in one, but it worked out because he then brought in Kate, and I will never forget. It was her first real television experience as a host, and she was scared to death. And because we ran, oh my God, Lavender Light. I mean, there was no. It was not an exception that what Kate said. People were married, divorced, and married again while they were waiting to go on.
Did you shoot the whole pilot in one day?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. We had to.
And the audience was so wonderful to stay.
And how did you decide? Were all 3 of you involved in deciding what went on that show, the makeup of the show, as far as finding the
it was a collaborative effort.
Yeah.
I mean, John and I and my co-producer Pam Jennings, who I think lives now in North Carolina and couldn't be here. That was a time in the early 90s when things were bubbling up. There was all these new gay magazines and gay organizations and gay performances downtown, and so I was already excited to be in New York and going to all these things. So
Yeah.
I remember talking to you, John, and saying, hey, how about this performer? And how about
There was a gay revolution going on, and it was a cultural revolution. It was an amazing, exciting period.
you wanted to bring that to
the early
television.
90s. And the idea was, gosh, my theory was, doesn't America want to see all this great stuff that's going on? I would think they would, and that's how we went about it, very positively. And we just knew that people would love it, that they would love what LGBT people in those days, I don't know if we called them that, but they would love what was going on all over America. There's just wonderful things were going on, and so we just started. That was the spirit that we came with, which was, you're going to love this. You're just going to really. I mean, there's so many wonderful things going on.
It was the reason these two talking to me got me more excited about doing the show. And if you think about the fact that we had the gay men's chorus, all of them, at the beginning of the show.
In the green room.
In a green room. And then Lavender Light at the end of the show, and in between multiple acts. Well, it all had to be lit. It had to be lit differently.
We even had a talk show segment like
Yes.
this in the middle with Todd Haynes. And,
that's
I mean,
right.
it's just amazing.
We had
It's like,
Rollins.
oh my God.
I mean, it was a major production pilot, and without any real rehearsal. I spent hours going around to work with the group so I could tell my camera crew, which had no rehearsal time, this is how I want it shot so that we can do this, and the lighting director. And I remember looking at John when he asked me, and I said, cameramen, I don't want to do a show, I don't want to have a crew that isn't, if not gay, at least they had to be gay friendly, or I didn't want to work with them, because I wanted that feeling to go back and forth between the crew, because if they're not happy, they're not going to shoot it as well. And I knew that. And John said, no problem. And we actually talked to people. And I'm going to tell the one story about a cameraman I'd worked with for 15 years. And I said to him, why would you want to do this show? And I explained that it was about gay and lesbian culture and life. And he goes, well, why do you want to do it? And I said, well, because I'm gay. And he said, so am I. But we pulled together a crew of people that, I mean, as I say, you never know. My gaydar just didn't work ever. But we pulled a crew together that cared and were there for us. And that made it so much easier for me to thoroughly enjoy spending the time working on the shows. And with these two, they're pushing me. I had a ball.
A pilot episode, you'd think it would telegraph what's going to come next. But I'm not sure that necessarily happened in the case of In the Life. So I just want to move on to the shows that followed in the first season, and then that really segued into what became the news magazine in the studio. Now, Katherine, did you know much? Did you knew what In the Life was or heard of it before you auditioned to be on it?
No, I didn't know it.
You were a clown, right?
I was, actually.
What was your training that
Big
led
Apple
you to be an
Circus
on-air
Clown
host
Carrier.
on a national TV show?
I had no training whatsoever. No one should have hired me. No, I had studied
had no
theater,
training.
and I picked up a backstage for the first time ever. I was like, I really should audition for things. And there was a tiny advertisement, gay news magazine looking for correspondents. I was like, gay news magazine? What?
Did you think it was print?
I didn't. Well, no, it said TV. It said TV, but it was a tiny ad, and so I sent you guys a small picture of myself waitressing. I don't even know how I got called in.
I remember that picture.
You remember
Right?
that
I remember
photo,
that
Charles?
picture.
Yeah, I was like, this is the only picture. I didn't have an 8x10, so I was like, here's a picture of me waitressing, and I auditioned, and they famously know I called it In the Lice.
In the Lice.
I said if you're interested in the lice, and I was like, if you have lice, you might need some shampoo, and you guys still hired me, even after I called it In the Lice.
Well, you were so personable,
Thanks.
and I wanted to be your friend and neighbor on that audition. So
Oh, it's like Mr. Lesbian Mr. Rogers moment. Oh, wow. It's a beautiful day in the gay neighborhood.
That sort of was our style. It was just a whole bunch of nice people.
John
getting together.
John and I used to always argue about
Makeup.
makeup and earrings. You saw in the first one, they had a drag queen make me up, so I looked like a drag queen. And my friends were like, "What?" Like my lips were 3 times the size, and I was like, "You don't like my lips, clearly." And but John would be like, "Can't you wear something sparkly? Just a little sparkly in your ear. Just can't you?" And I was like, "Can't you?" You projecting? We had so many arguments about my earrings.
But
I still don't have them, John.
We sent the crew out to buy clothes for a day, but keep the tags, and we used to hide the tags.
Like the
We
soap
used to
operas.
hide the
to bring them
tags.
back the next day. Remember that?
Your sister did that, actually.
yes,
Charles.
my sister went shopping with you.
Yeah, I always had like labels glued to my, like taped to my back, and was like trying to do stand-ups with like cardboard.
And we
It's like,
hope
don't sweat, because
and
we got to
we hope
return
this-
those tomorrow.
the stores maybe weren't watching the show, because the next day everybody would bring their clothes back, and that's how we. That's that was
how
our
you
clothing.
That's how you do low budget television production, really.
Yeah.
I mean, the drag queen makeup
Soaps
artists,
do
they
that.
were probably volunteering to do
Totally,
Sure.
they were
They
fantastic.
were.
I just looked a
remember
little
that we had
ridiculous.
problems with some of them.
Yeah.
Bob, did you do? You didn't do the country episode, did you? You did. What did you do after that? After the first episode?
Well, I did several episodes. I did not do the country one, but that same time we shot another show that I loved, and that was the where we had the entire cast of falsettos.
Oh yes.
Was it another like variety show, like performances?
It was variety performance, and we had the cast of falsettos on, and we tried to sort of put the story together, and their producers gave us a very strict rule that we couldn't make it look like the show. And so we had to redo and rethink a lot from that standpoint, because I wanted to stage it. I mean, you got a guy in bed dying, and the nurse is there, or the doctor is there, and the boyfriend is there, and you want it to look nice and give it a feeling. And what are you going to do that's not sort of similar to what they did on stage? And we had to make sure, because they said if they would not let us air it if it looked like the stage production.
Do you remember the challenge of the March on Washington episode?
Oh,
Were you in D.C. for that with the whole?
I always say I went to the March on Washington, but I never saw it. I was in the control room the entire time. But Chuck, all I remember is the struggles Chuck had just to get us to be able to do it, and then get a little airtime for it.
We had run out of money, right?
Yeah. Yes.
We had totally run out of money after that first season, right?
Oh,
and so
yeah.
that was the reason why we actually had 206. Thank goodness, was shot here in the center. Remember?
That's right. With you in bed with Sarah Citron.
Me,
Yeah,
in bed
dancing
with
in
Sarah
bed.
Citron. And we had no money, so we did a clip show so we could save what little money we had, so we could do the March on Washington.
You did a best of In the Life in the 6th episode,
Yes.
basically.
Oh, I remember that. Yes.
And they all loved it. I mean, that was a best. That was a pretty funny show, but it allowed us to save a little money and to fundraise a little bit, so we could get that March show done.
Yeah, and the March show was it was really very ambitious, because not only did we shoot live the performers going on, but we had crews going out at the different areas to pick up the reactions of the people, the marchers that were there, so that it really became, we could insert these things, these little clips in to the live acts. It was sort of a challenge without having any money basically to do. But we had a ball doing it, and as I say, I have these wonderful memories of my videotape gal saying, "Ha ha, ha ha, we know what that particular Cameron's favorite people are," and I go, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Only leather." And I go, "Okay, fine," you know. We would just go on, but it was a challenge to do, and I had a ball doing it.
And then did the studio shows come right after that the next season? Did you start with Katherine, and those auditions were right after all of that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Katherine, do you remember? I mean, so you didn't bring any experience, so were you quite nervous when you went into these first round? And did you even understand the reach of the show as far as?
No, I know we talked about that earlier. Yeah, I mean, I was nervous. I mean, I obviously it was like everything. We were figuring everything out. I was figuring out how to do it. We were figuring out how to do it. It was in this studio, and there was this black cat that would walk by. It was all matted, like, I'd finally nail a stand up, and the cat would go, and.
We had a lot of
But-
dropouts on the tape in the edit room because there was so much cat hair on all the equipment. I do remember that.
Yeah, there
It
was the cat.
such
But that cat was scary.
We
But
made those
yeah,
shows for like $9,000.
No, I
each
know,
show.
no. It was so. Yes, I was nervous, and I was saying to you earlier, John, that I didn't realize it until I asked about ratings, and I didn't know what ratings meant in terms of people. And once they said, "Oh, we got a 1 rating or something in Philadelphia," and that translated to 400,000 people or something. Then it started to add up. Like we're in one night in one broadcast, we're reaching so many more people than I could imagine. And each time we added another station, and then I started doing broadcast liaison for a while and calling all the program directors, and it was just watching this grow exponentially so quickly was. It was remarkable.
And did you get, as you were recognized, what kind of responses were people giving you? Like on the street, did people must have started to recognize you then and all that?
Yeah. I mean, as doing stand-ups, or you mean just regular
just
walking?
afterwards, like out in the community, and what were people saying?
People were amazing, and it was a time where I'd be on a flight and the steward would be like, "Thank you so much. Here's some extra peanuts." I'd had some extra peanuts, and people would whisper, and at a bank line, it was like, "You're welcome." I was like, "For what?" And so, but it was, yes, I got a lot of great responses, and then I was telling John earlier, I also got spit on doing stand-ups. So it depended because it was out loud, and I'd be saying something, and it wasn't so popular necessarily in the '90s and the early '90s to be talking about being gay. All the stand-ups that we did. So
The scariest
but for the
one-
most part, it was amazing how people would come up and say, young people would say, I'm able to watch it because it's on PBS, and I told my mom I'm going up to watch PBS. So it was like, wink, wink. It was like fantastic, and crying, and it meant. I mean, this was it. This was what was on. There wasn't much else that anyone could actually turn on the television set. Parents, straight people were coming up. I didn't know. I didn't understand. About my gay child. So really, I had a wonderful privilege of being able to hear the commentary wherever I walked, and that was amazing.
But there were some scary moments. We sent Katherine to the first march in Montana. Remember that?
Yeah, in Helena, Montana.
Yeah.
Montana. And I was nervous. I didn't know if you'd come back.
Janet Boss, who just walked in the room.
Hey, Janet.
Hi, Janet, was a producer. We went to Helena, Montana. It was our first gay pride parade. And Kate Linton was there, and she's like, if they weren't so drunk, they'd be pretty. These guys were protesting with their, queer, steers not queers, and I started interviewing them, and they just were like, this is, just going on about how illegal we were because it was illegal. The sodomy law was there, and just going off. This guy finally he's like, "You're disgusting. What do you think is right about being a lesbian?" And his friend he's like, "Bo, how do you know she's a lesbian?" He goes, "I can tell she's a lesbian." I was like, "Well, you're right, Bo, I am." And I was like, "And queer is spelled with a U." And I was like, "We're done with this interview." And they just started to yell, and they got increasingly violent as the day went on. And I had to do the stand-up, and I was like, okay, this poor camera crew was all like lugged down. And I said, well, Janet remembers this. I said, we have to get in front of the march. Once the march starts, we just have to get in front and we'll do the stand-up. They started marching, and the people were so scared. They were like, stop the violence, stop the hate, stop the violence. They started running. So I had to run ahead and do just one take of a intro. And then that night, rocks were thrown, and they kept, yelling death threats. And, it was just, there was so many times we traveled the country and just heard so many stories. This was a case where I just thought, these people are so brave. They are so brave, because there are cameras here, and they're all going home. I'm flying back to New York, so.
It was a fabulous show, though. It really
you,
was.
John.
It was really good. It was very moving.
I always said to the people on camera, the guests were really the heroes of that show because, You know, it was a policy. I think there was only one story in all the years Jack May can say where people always had to be on camera and be identified. I think there was only one story on gays in the military.
I think it was about being gay in the military. Where
I think it was the only story where we didn't identify. Entrapment too. Okay.
But yeah, that was important for me to make sure that anyone who appeared on the show, we would have their name on the screen as well as what they did. And so a lot of people wouldn't come on In the Life at the beginning because they didn't want to do that. But, I really wanted to make that a policy. So for the most part, you're right, over the 20 years.
And in those early years, I mean, most television looks at our life was sensationalized, kind of scandalous. And so we had to really gain people's trust in the beginning, and they had to know that we weren't going to mess with their story. And it took a short while to gain that trust, but then people did.
I just wanted to mention, speaking of people being on the show, I think there's a couple people here who were the face of In the Life, along with you, Katherine. Alan Tulin is here. Stand up, Alan.
Alan.
Hi, Alan.
He was the voice of In the Life. He did all of the funding credits. And Chris Ann Eastwood is here from Los Angeles. Chris Ann was our Andy Rooney with Katherine. And is Greg here? Greg, stand up. Greg.
Hello, Greg. Greg Watt.
Greg and I had the cat. We shared the cat moments.
Oh, that's amazing. That's amazing.
Do you have any most memorable stories you worked on or produced, Katherine, or just something? Because I know you did so many fantastic stories for the show. Is there one that really stands out for you? Working on it, putting together? Oh my God, there's so many. I mean, we were. I think the most emotional was a kid who had shot himself, Robbie Kirkland. That was, his mother picked me up at the airport, and I hired a local crew and went to her house, and she said, "Do you want to see Robbie's room? It's going to make me cry even now." And she had not made his bed, and he had shot himself 6 months before, and on the floor were his letters, his diary writings about being gay and how he didn't think he'd be accepted. And she had finally found they belonged to a conservative church. She had just changed churches, and she was bringing him to his first accepting church, and had found a group for him. But he shot himself the Saturday, like 2 days before. She got him there, and she became an activist. And I think, I cannot stress enough, and we were talking about, the bravery. I mean, I did a story on gay employees of Chrysler, and I remember they had a whole gay employee group, and I said, we're going to be bringing cameras tomorrow. Who wants to be on camera? And basically everybody got up and left. And I was like, was it something I said? And a few stayed. And the people who, who appeared on camera and told their stories, I remember, Jayne, you submitted a story about a gay couple that won Foster Parents of the Year in this tiny, Harriet produced that with me, who's here, Harriet Hirschhorn. And it was like a one stoplight town, and they had like 10 foster kids, and these straight foster kids, had nominated their dads, and they won in the state of Iowa, Foster Parents of the Year. These are stories that just were at the time, and we had Kate Bornstein as a correspondent in 1995. We were doing stories, we were doing transgender stories, we were doing gay youth stories, military stories, whatever we could do, and also really critiquing our own community. I mean, that was part of really looking at the complexity within our community, whether it was, about racial diversity and these complicated discussions, and always, as John said, coming from the premise, being gay is okay. That's not what we're debating here. We're going to talk about all the the complexities of our community. And yes, who's attacking us, but really who we are as a community, and all of our, again, complexity.
Yeah, I can't stress enough that back then, whenever you had a gay person on television or in the news, the station would always have an opposing view, the conservative voice about why it was bad to be gay or evil or sinful. And our show was really the first to have gay people on, and that was a given, that we're not going to talk about that. Gay people are American. They're your fellow Americans and contribute to society, and hear their stories. That was
Yeah.
kind of revolutionary.
Yeah, it was important to get over that debate. The idea that fair and balance, I guess the concept was that no longer would we accept that concept anymore, that we were past that debate, that we were into other issues, and we were into the energy and the excitement of the changes that were taking place within the community. And we just didn't, I thought that was pretty brave of us to do that. But to be honest with you, we got a lot of support from the programming stations throughout the country over time. That was the big thing that, originally we're trying to do, is that it's not only political in terms of what we are doing, but it would be continued to be political for program directors and for people who were watching television in their public television stations to support this program to continue, because that was an important, a lot of brave program directors who were a little bit afraid of losing their jobs for putting this show
and
on.
funding, and some did.
They got a lot of pushback from a lot of their local viewers.
They just quickly. One of my, we all wore a million hats, right? So one of mine was literally calling and saying, "Are you going to air us this month, and at what time? And how's it doing? How did?" And they would say that this was the days when people would fax. It's like, and you have to be pissed off to fax, right? You got to type it, you got to print it, you got to bring it to the fax, you got to put the number in, And at first, people would, the program directors would come in on a Monday morning and they'd be like, "Oh my God, there's all these faxes. Like, why are you airing this gay stuff?" At the very beginning, then they started getting faxes with no names on them, but saying, "Thank you for airing this." And then they'd said, we're getting faxes with people's names on it, saying, "I'm a member, and thank you for airing this." And it's like this idea of these growing faxes of support. In the days, there'd be like a pile of faxes, That was, and it was brave of them, because they would really get heat.
But from both sides, which was the wonderful thing, because I used to love, somebody call and complain, I gave money and they won't put it on. I said, well, just, send them a nice postcard. And I remember one time the program director of Maryland called me up and said, "Stop, please, stop. I don't want to see another postcard. I just got 1 million postcards this year. We're going to put you on. Please, stop." And they thought we were organizing it. We didn't organize it in that level. We just said, it's on, and ask your local station if they're running it. We didn't say, go out there and protest or anything. And so it was a great building tool, was to have these members all over the country who began this slow relationship with program directors in small stations around the country. I mean, my favorite station that we were on was the North Dakota. We were on North Dakota when it was the first stations.
I know.
That was so cool.
My favorite was when they'd say, "We don't have any gay people here." I'd go to a PBS convention. I was like, "Really?"
No, I can remember when we first started out, I had said to John, I said, the TV station where I graduated from college in Seattle, I know people there. I think I can get us to get on the station. And I go out there, and the program director, and I'd sent a tape to them, and the program director, who I'd gone to school with, said, "Well, your production quality isn't up to our standards." And I go, "And what was wrong with the production quality?" And she said, "Well, it's..." I said, "You are upset because there are gay people here on this show?" She said, "Well, no. It's just you don't do things as well." Well, I'd happened to see a show that they had produced the night before. That was a piece of, and I looked at her and I said, "Now, can I compare our show to your show?" She said, "What's wrong?" I said, "Let's sit down. You got the tapes. Let's sit down and look at them." And I said, "Miscues here. Your lights aren't on here. You can't hear these people." I said, "We don't have that on ours." And she said, well, I'll have to think about it. And she was scared. It was just their fear. It was a fear of putting gay people on. Through a friend of mine, he had contacts with the 2 gay newspapers in Seattle at the time. So I got an interview. And as you said, it became something. I did the interview in the paper. All of a sudden, people were writing into KCTS. We want the show. We want us. They'd never seen the show. They'd only seen what I'd said on the newspaper. But it ultimately, I think it first aired at 2 o'clock in the morning, which is, it was safe. But through complaints and that, it ultimately became
a 10 o'clock show.
A 10 o'clock show, yeah. Or even...
Those were the great times, I thought, was the 10 o'clock shows. When we got a 10 o'clock show, it was like,
10 o'clock
hallelujah.
show, we celebrate.
So we just finished watching clips from the rest of the 20-year history of In the Life, and I wanted to start with asking the 3 staff people here, Jack, David, and Desireena, what were some of the memorable stories that you worked on? Maybe we'll start with you, Desireena.
Okay, well, it just, watching that last set of clips, it really triggered a memory, of doing the story about lesbian Muslims. And I think one of the really important things to me about having this platform, having this opportunity to reach a national audience was to really think about diversity. And, as you saw in those clips, like, we really showed everyone, like, brown people, black people, Native Americans. I mean, I think we talk about diversity now in terms of, Hollywood or like, diversity in gender. We had it back in the 90s. So it was really like an honor and really an amazing feat, I think. And we were all thinking about it back then. So like in terms of that issue, we were good.
Yeah,
so.
and I think that goes back to John Scagliotti, and that was his vision, that we really reflect the diversity of the community on the show.
Yeah.
And what about David? You wore a lot of hats in community relations, and you spoke to a lot of people around the country as one of your job titles, to actually talk and show stories to different audiences. What was that like, or what were some of the stories that you remember that resonated with people?
Well, one of the stories was about Bayard Rustin, because he was the organizer 1963 March on Washington. For me being a gay African-American male, I didn't see a lot of role models and people in high places or doing a lot of things that I could model myself after. And when I got to the show, that was in 2000, I was so happy to be there because one of the things I would say was, I wish I had this when I was coming out. I mean, I came out when I was 17, but not really out. I realized that my sexuality then, but still had a trouble coming out period with, being all the derogatory names, called those names. So seeing Bayard Rustin, and then Phil Wilson, another person. I mean, I'm celebrating 30 years being a long-term survivor. And so to see someone like that, on film, talking openly about his HIV status made me feel empowered as well. One of the benefits of going out and being in community relations and communications was the opportunity to be at the GLSEN conferences. Everyone, I'm not going to assume, but it's the Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network. Also with exhibiting at the Gay Life Expo, going to Philadelphia and presenting for the American Psychological Association, and developing a platform for the Supporting Youth episode, which it's Supporting Youth, and then production actually configured it and put together segments to make a sort of a classroom educational video and we retitled it called Supporting Youth, Their Education and Survival. And I was able to present that, basically presenting segments in different conferences or different locations to have people get inspired and to have the discussion started about being gay and lesbian, bisexual and transgender. So I'll stop there, but that was basically, my having my pom-poms and cheerleading across the U.S.
And
Amen.
Jack,
yeah, I'm really, really proud of the work that I got to do at In the Life. It was such a great legacy to jump off, and do your own thing. I mean, that legacy that John and Charles and John Scagliotti and Katherine Linton built for us really made such a difference by the time I got there, which was 2007. And we kind of shifted from a news magazine to more of like a gay frontline. We got very serious and very investigative, and there was all these serious issues going on, like, bullycides and marriage equality and, HIV criminalization laws and trans youth, So yeah, I think it's the youth stories that spoke so poignantly to me. I also had a story like Katherine, where I went into the room of someone who had committed suicide because they were being bullied for being gay, and that doesn't leave you, and you kind of informs everything that you make. And so when I walked away from In the Life, I went ahead and I made my documentary Free Cece with Laverne Cox. But that project, we started talking about it at In the Life. It was going to be a segment on In the Life. But see, In the Life was such a great incubator that it allowed me to go further. And for that, I will always be grateful.
It also always heartens me to know that people like you, Jack, and Desireena going on and getting careers, and Katherine too. Other people, alumni from In the Life's production team, gone on to win Academy Awards, like Roger Ross Williams, who produced segments for In the Life, and Dan Carslake, who did the documentary for The Bible Tells Me So. So it's really great to see that. Jack, I'm curious though, as you mentioned the kind of hard-hitting stories you did, was that because, unlike what we were facing in the early part of In the Life, when there was no visibility for LGBT people, by the time you were on board, how did that change the kinds of stories you decided to tell?
Well, I mean, the process, I'm sure, was different. I mean, we were scouring the headlines, and, we had gone through various political administrations, George Bush years. And then when we had Obama, it was like a party, and a celebration. So there were a lot of uplifting. I think every story we wanted to have some amount of hope, and we really wanted to just, it was hard to get subjects sometimes. Specifically, I know Katherine, you're here. She produced a wonderful segment called Becoming Me, which we decided to make a whole half-hour episode on gender nonconforming youth, and to get these parents to talk about, how they're raising their children and listening to their children who are telling them about their gender nonconformity issues and the life that they're leading. It was very difficult, but once we, showed up and put, turned the cameras on, and we always listened to people. And that's the thing about In the Life. It was always there, and it was always showing up, and it was like, there'd be some demonstration, and it was because, we'd have that footage because we were there, I mean, and just so many instances were like that. And I just, like I said, I just feel really privileged to be a part of that, and it's really informed my own work.
Jayne, as someone who volunteered your time and talents for other LGBT nonprofits for many, many years, what was it about In the Life that made you want to come on board and be the co-chair for as many years as you were?
Well, it wasn't really by design, but I sort of got hooked. It was a natural extension of what we had done at Lambda, and it was really bringing it out to the world. Even though there was more LGBT presence in the media by that point, it still was very limited. And the reality is we were showing real people leading real lives. We didn't shy away from controversy, but it was never where we expected it. And that was very rewarding. And to this day, I still meet people who say, this was my lifeline. You know, I grew up in such and such a place, and I didn't know where I would find gay people. I remember a young man who wrote to us once and said, last night I was able to watch an entire episode, albeit with the clicker in hand, listening for a car door to slam. His parents and his brothers, who he described as having no end of fag jokes, his words, were out. And he said, I know that in a couple of years I'm going to go to college and I'll be able to meet people like me, but for now, this is all I have. And the most amazing part of this story is that he came from an area on the outskirts of New York City. You know, so you could see what you were doing for people, and you could see what you were sharing. You know, we would do things that were gutsy and visibly gutsy, and we thought we might have pushback, but you'll probably remember one of the most, one of the pieces we got the most response on, and not all favorable, was, you know, we had done leather bars and nobody was concerned about that, and we had done all kinds of political things, but we did a piece about two lesbians who were deaf. And they were going to be inseminated and have a child, and they were trying to have a deaf child. And, you know, we would get this incredible feedback. So, you know, every day was something new and exciting, and reaching out to people who still didn't have anything else.
I remember that, yes. I want to talk a little bit about how we were able to do some of the kinds of programming we did with very, very little money. Desireena, you were part of the episode where we did something called In the Life Goes Global, where we went around the world, and we actually did some stories from other countries.
Yeah, I happened to do the episode, the segment about the Philippines, the Philippine lesbian activism, just because I was actually going home to visit family. So we were all going on vacation somehow.
That's right. Katherine was going to Brazil. John, you were going to Hong Kong with your family, and we said, hey, you're going to go on vacation. Can you carry a camcorder?
Can we actually not go on vacation and do some work?
Right.
The most fun work ever.
You know, I just want to add one thing, and that was part of what kept me and others at In the Life, and that is the incredible dedication of staff. We were all family. You know, there was never a clock out time. There was never a I can't do that. And I think everybody not only loved the work they were doing, but saw the impact of it.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, you know, I wouldn't have stayed otherwise because I was barely making rent. But like the fact that you were really like impacting people's lives, and it was impacting my life so you know, so profoundly. Like I kind of came out in this milieu where it was almost like, wow, that it's pretty normal to be gay, and like, you know, what I was experiencing personally was happening nationally because of this show. So it was like I was coming out as the show was coming out to the nation. So it was a pretty amazing experience.
So after 20 years of being on the air from 92 to 2012, In the Life got another life, so to speak, and I want Chris from UCLA to talk a little bit about, you know, how is In the Life living on?
Back in 2012, you, and I love that fashion statement on your head, by the way, and John came to us at UCLA and said, well, we'd like to have an afterlife for this show, and could you help us? And I guess the reason you came to us is because UCLA Film and Television Archive had, since 2005, begun a partnership with Outfest, founded at UCLA in 1982, to create the UCLA Outfest Legacy Project, which initially was a collection of a couple of thousand tapes of films that had been submitted to Outfest. Some of them had been shown, others hadn't. that collection has since then grown to 36,000 titles and is now the largest LBGT moving image media collection in the world. And so we said, yes, this would be an interesting thing to do. And thanks to funding that we received from the Pride Foundation and Arcus and Henry van Emmeringen, we were able in record time, I mean really amazing, 14 months, be able to create a website. We are starting to put the uncut interviews as secondary material onto the site, and I mean, our plan is to really keep expanding the site, so and to make sure that In the Life really does last much, much longer than all of us too.
And what you're seeing right now on the screen are some screen grabs from the UCLA Film and Television Archive website, where every single episode of In the Life from its 20-year history can be instantly streamed. You can just click on any of those links and you can start watching any of the episodes. And what's amazing is this is a resource that you can access anywhere in the world if you have an internet connection. So.
And I have to say, I've been at UCLA now as the head of the archive for about 10 years, and this is really one of my one of the things I'm most proud of that we did this, and that we were able to do this, especially in the time, and really I think it is a quite handsome site, and it's a lot of fun just to go, just to browse.
Oh, you have to wind down and open it up to questions and answers from the audience. But before we do that, I just want to acknowledge the people who actually worked for In the Life over the 20 years. Anyone who's, first, Michelle Crystal, could you please stand up as executive director, the last executive directors of In the Life. Any board members, any board members in In the Life, please stand up and stay standing. Yes, board members in the Life.
Orlando.
Yeah. Staff members of In the Life. Anyone who worked on staff, please stand up. Yes, thank you. Volunteers and supporters and freelance producers, editors, please stand up. Oh. All right, great. So now I'm going to ask John if you want to help me have people up and answer questions. But before we do that, I just want to come back full circle to why we were here to celebrate the 25th anniversary of the pilot, and have Madeline Alnick, who was in the audience, to give her story about what it was like. Yes, start the Q&A with Madeline.
So you were at the pilot?
Yes, I was asked to come tell my story. So I was in the audience of the pilot episode. I was friends with some actors who had a group called the Five Lesbian Brothers, and they did theater downtown, and it was very, ghettoized to do lesbian theater. But then there was going to be this television show, and Katherine was talking about how PBS didn't give you guys any money. No one knew that, I can tell you. And for all the hard work that everyone here did, on the side of the audience, it just seemed like so many things were happening, and then this was the next great thing that was happening, was this show. It was like, yes, this happened, that happened, and now we get our TV show, and it was so exciting to be in the audience. I remember that when we were the in-house audience, but you ran the opening credits for the audience, and when the words "It's lesbian, it's gay" appeared, people cheered because it was shocking to see those words written, and that it was going to be on television, and it was like an opening credits. Like, that was so exciting. But anyway, so the reason why John and Charles wanted me to come tell this story was because, before we were sitting outside waiting to go in the audience, and they had us all sign release forms, and I did think a little bit, I wasn't out to my parents. My mom knew I was in ACT UP, but my mom was very conservative, and so I wasn't out to her. And so the show was taped. The audience again was like really, really riled up, and and loved the show. And I remember the Lavender Light Gospel Choir ending it, and it just feeling like it was sitting in the audience. We felt like we were experiencing a hallucination because we just couldn't even believe that there was a television show now. It was so incredible. And again, like everyone who worked so hard, it just was so legitimizing, and it just felt I can't even say like how special it felt. But anyway, so then the way the New York broadcast happened was, before it was going to be on PBS, it was going to be on another cable channel, like 21 was the broadcast before the PBS. So Lisa Crone, who people now know as the double Tony winner for writing Fun Home, she was one of the lesbian brothers. And that's a great musical, everyone should see it. And anyway, so we went over to their house to watch this premiere episode, and at one point during the episode, they cut away from whatever performance was going on just to a close-up of my big head, just my head filling the screen. It was a big audience, because when I saw it, it was like, oh, whatever. Anyway, so then my dad called me, and and my mom had been watching not even the PBS broadcast, but the advanced broadcast. Anyway, so there's a long story that follows that, not worth sharing. But anyway, so it was that was just great, and the show, and then I remember also, although I know I wasn't asked to talk about this, but I remember also with the Lesbian Brothers, something came up where they were doing this skit, or part of a play of theirs, where it was a parody of this movie about German schoolgirls, and Maidkin in uniform, and one of the Lesbian Brothers playing the sexy teacher who comes in and kisses everyone goodnight, and then when she goes to, these chaste kisses on the forehead, and all the girls are so in love with her, and then when she goes to kiss the last person, they just start making out wildly. And I remember that brought up some issues, am I correct? And we had to, because it was like within the context of gay theater, yes, that's hilarious. With the premiere episode of the first gay and lesbian TV show, this teacher, this woman making out with a student, not. So that was interesting because that maybe hadn't been thought through beforehand. So, and I think I remember there was a cut to like someone, they just didn't show the kiss. You just heard maybe something, or people looking around. I don't know, but I remember that.
Film in the archives from the B-roll.
So that's an interesting thing of that whole thing of outside of, yes. Anyway, so that's why I thanks for telling me to come tell this story. It's very strange, but thank you.
Thank you. So, John, do you want to...
For future historians and documentarians, it is now cataloged. And that is probably the most important aspect of UCLA having this footage. So all of you race to UCLA and find that kiss. Because I know you're all dying. Yes?
Since we all loved it and we missed it, is there any chance of getting something like that back again?
A TV series like In the Life?
Yeah, right.
Start asking for checks, fundraising. It's all about money. Yes, I mean, there's certainly room for a program like In the Life or gay television series. And that's happening in some ways as people have their little mini web. No, it's not the same way.
I have a very similar question. In that, I know that there is a lot of things online today, but Logo had a gay news program for a little bit that went away. Is there anything else on television that is LGBT-specific news anywhere?
Not that I know of.
I think we have to start In the Life up again.
You can.
Sounds like maybe this is a
Reboot.
signal.
Do you think it's a function of the times, that, In the Life was on when we had nothing at all. And then it went from, the variety to news and going around. And then it got really big. The production values and everything, it was fabulous. And then one day I got a phone call saying, can you take pictures at our goodbye party, you know, like, so, you know, I mean, do you think it could survive, you know, there could be an In the Life again, or was it just because we weren't on TV at all? You know, I mean, I don't think shows like Will and Grace or Ellen, or, I mean, it's just not the same thing, and that was kind of, you know, the talk and the excuse, like, well, you know, it's people don't watch you now because we're all over the place. Well, not in the same way, I don't think. But what do you think?
There is a specific need for news.
There's no question about that, and I agree a lot of what's out there isn't what we did. But there were a variety of factors, one of which was money, certainly. You know, as we have more and more organizations within our communities competing for the same dollars, as people's attention spans got smaller, and as things, and when we, during the time that we made this decision, you know, people were doing more and more online, and it wasn't that we couldn't have done that, but it's a very different beast. And part of it is the times. Yeah.
And I just want to say, 20-year run for any television show, that's quite amazing, right? I don't know of any other TV show. Yes, Mark.
At a certain point, I think Harvey Firestein had a big role in the show. What was it like working with Harvey and getting that voice ready for television?
Wow. Oh, Jack, were you there?
No.
It kind of happened after I left too. Oh, Jayne, you were there with Harvey.
Yeah, we actually gave Harvey a forum at the end of the show. He was sort of our Andy Rooney, for those of you that are old enough to remember Andy Rooney. And he had pretty much creative freedom to talk about issues and in his own inimitable way. And that worked for a while. There's nothing like that exists now either, not just for him, but for others.
No, and I highly recommend going to the website, typing in the search field Harvey Firestein, and you can watch all of those great commentaries that he did for In the Life.
They were called outtakes.